"Excuse me, but first class is for premium passengers," the flight attendant said sharply, her eyes darting to Naomi's colorful hoodie and sneakers. Naomi blinked, gripping her ticket tighter. "I know. That's why I'm here," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with confusion. The attendant, whose name tag read Deborah, leaned in slightly, her tone lowering as if to shield others from the exchange. "Sweetheart, I don't think you understand. First class isn't open to everyone. Perhaps you're in the wrong line?" From a few feet away, Malcolm Carter noticed the shift in his daughter's expression. Her earlier excitement was dimming, replaced with uncertainty. He immediately strode over, his polished shoes clicking against the terminal floor. "Is there an issue here?" Malcolm's deep, calm voice cut through the hum of the airport noise. Deborah straightened instantly, her professional demeanor snapping back into place. "Oh, no issue at all, sir. I was just explaining to your daughter that this line is for first-class passengers. There may have been a mistake with her ticket." Naomi turned to her father, clutching the small paper in her hand. "Dad, she's saying I can't board first class." Did you enjoy this gripping tale of justice, family, and resilience? Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment about your favorite moment, and hit subscribe to join us for more powerful stories like this. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update, because the next story could be even more intense. Malcolm's gaze shifted to the flight attendant, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp. "And what exactly makes you think there's a mistake with her ticket?" Deborah hesitated, her practiced smile faltering. "Well, it's just, we have to be thorough. Sometimes tickets get upgraded improperly, and we—" "Do you check everyone's ticket this thoroughly?" Malcolm interjected smoothly. "Or just hers?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken tension. Passengers in the surrounding lines began to take notice, their curious glances adding weight to the moment. Deborah's face flushed as she stammered, "Oh, no, of course not. I didn't mean. It's just protocol to ensure everything is correct." "Protocol," Malcolm repeated, his voice calm but laced with unmistakable authority. "Interesting. Then let's follow protocol and confirm that her first-class ticket is exactly what it says it is." Deborah's hand trembled slightly as she scanned Naomi's ticket, the words "First Class" glowing on her screen. She quickly handed it back with a forced smile. "Everything checks out. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Malcolm said coolly, "and when we land, I'll be speaking to your supervisor to discuss how thoroughly you apply this protocol of yours." Deborah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her face was pale as the Carters walked away, leaving her frozen at the counter. As they headed toward the gate, Naomi clung to her father's side. "Dad, was it because I'm black?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Malcolm sighed, the question hitting him like a blow. "Sometimes people judge what they don't understand," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But that's their problem, not ours. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." Naomi nodded, her father's words steadying her. She lifted her chin and squared her shoulders, determined not to let the moment ruin her trip. But what Naomi didn't know was that this incident would spark a chain reaction far bigger than either of them could imagine. The first-class cabin was everything Naomi had imagined. Plush leather seats, soothing ambient lighting, and flight attendants gliding effortlessly down the aisle with trays of champagne and hot towels. But the warmth of the luxurious surroundings couldn't shake the chill from Naomi's earlier encounter. She settled into her seat by the window, her fingers trailing over the smooth armrest. Beside her, Malcolm flipped through the in-flight menu, his face calm, but his movements deliberate. Naomi could feel the tension radiating from him, even though he hadn't said much since they boarded. "Dad," she whispered, leaning closer, "are you really going to talk to her supervisor?" Malcolm looked at her, his expression softening. "Absolutely. She needs to learn that making assumptions comes with consequences." Naomi nodded, though she didn't feel entirely reassured. Her father had always taught her to rise above prejudice, to let her accomplishments speak louder than anyone's biases. But this felt different. The way the woman had looked at her, it wasn't just an assumption. It was a dismissal, as if she didn't belong there at all. As the flight attendants prepared for takeoff, Malcolm's phone buzzed on the tray table. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening when he saw the message. "Is something wrong?" Naomi asked, noticing the subtle change in his expression. Malcolm hesitated for a moment before slipping the phone into his pocket. "Nothing you need to worry about, Princess. Let's just enjoy the flight." Naomi frowned, sensing there was more to his answer, but she decided not to press him. Instead, she turned her attention to the window as the plane taxied down the runway. The flight attendants began their routine shortly after takeoff, moving seamlessly through the cabin with practiced efficiency. But Naomi noticed Deborah's demeanor had changed. Her steps were hurried, her smile forced, and every so often she cast nervous glances toward Malcolm. It didn't take long for Naomi to understand why. Halfway through the flight, a man in a crisp suit approached Malcolm's seat. His badge gleamed under the cabin lights, and the word "Director" was stitched into his uniform. He leaned down and spoke in a low voice, his expression one of quiet urgency. "Mr. Carter, I just received a report regarding an incident at check-in. I came aboard to personally address it." Naomi's heart skipped a beat as she watched her father lean back in his seat, his face unreadable. "I see," Malcolm said. "And what did the report say?" The director hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "The flight attendant in question has admitted to mishandling the situation. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, but I assure you, we take these matters very seriously. I'd like to formally apologize on behalf of the airline." Naomi glanced at her father, waiting for his response. But Malcolm didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied the director carefully, his silence almost more intimidating than words. "And what happens now?" Malcolm asked finally. The director cleared his throat. "We're initiating a review of her conduct. Pending the outcome, she may face disciplinary action, up to and including termination. Of course, that decision ultimately rests with—" Malcolm held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I don't need to hear the rest. I'll handle it personally." The director's eyes widened, and Naomi's stomach flipped. Handle it personally? What did that mean? The director stammered, "Of course, Mr. Carter. If there is anything else we can do to rectify—" "I'll let you know," Malcolm said curtly, dismissing him with a nod. As the director retreated, Naomi couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "Dad, why did he seem so nervous?" Malcolm sighed, rubbing his temples. "Because I own this airline, Naomi, and that means when people mess up like this, it's my responsibility to fix it." Naomi stared at him, her mind reeling. "You own the airline?" "Yes," Malcolm said simply. "And now you understand why what happened back there is unacceptable. Not just for you, but for anyone." Naomi leaned back in her seat, her thoughts racing. Suddenly everything made sense. Deborah's panic, the director's urgency, even her father's calm but commanding presence. But instead of feeling reassured, Naomi felt a knot of unease tighten in her chest. "Dad," she said quietly, "what are you going to do about her?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the window, his expression unreadable once more. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. "Actions have consequences, Naomi, and some lessons are best learned the hard way." Naomi shivered at the weight of his words, sensing that whatever happened next would be far bigger than anything she could imagine. The rest of the flight passed in tense silence. Naomi couldn't focus on the in-flight movie or the snacks placed neatly on her tray. Her thoughts kept circling back to her father's words and the ominous tone he'd used. Some lessons are best learned the hard way. She glanced at him as he sat beside her, flipping casually through a magazine. To anyone else, he would have looked completely at ease, but Naomi knew better. Her father had a quiet intensity that often masked his true emotions. When he said he was going to handle something, he meant it. As the plane began its descent, Naomi felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread. She wondered what would happen to Deborah once they landed. Would she lose her job? Would she apologize? And would her father even accept it? When the wheels touched down, Malcolm leaned over to her and smiled, the warmth in his expression returning. "Ready to go, Princess?" Naomi nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. They disembarked ahead of the other passengers, as first-class travelers often did. But instead of heading toward the baggage claim, Malcolm led Naomi through a side hallway, past a series of glass offices overlooking the terminal. Naomi noticed the glances they were getting from employees as they passed, curious, respectful, even nervous. "Where are we going?" Naomi asked. Malcolm gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "To make sure this situation is handled properly." Naomi's stomach tightened as they entered a sleek conference room. A large glass table dominated the space, and the walls were adorned with framed photos of planes and executives. Deborah was already there, sitting stiffly in one of the chairs. Her uniform was still immaculate, but her face was pale, and her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. Standing beside her was the director from earlier, who looked equally uncomfortable. When Malcolm walked in, they both straightened, their eyes darting nervously between him and Naomi. "Mr. Carter," the director began, "thank you for taking the time to—" Malcolm raised a hand, cutting him off. "No need for formalities. Let's get to the point." Deborah swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to Naomi. "Sir, I'd like to apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. I never meant to offend anyone." "Didn't you?" Malcolm asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Because it certainly seemed like you made a judgment about my daughter based on nothing more than how she looked." Deborah's face flushed, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Malcolm wasn't finished. "You saw a young black girl in a hoodie and sneakers, and you assumed she didn't belong in first class," he continued. "You didn't ask any questions. You didn't check her ticket. You dismissed her outright. Do you understand how insulting that is? How harmful?" Deborah looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. I didn't mean it that way. I was just trying to follow protocol." Malcolm's expression darkened. "Don't use protocol as an excuse for prejudice. You didn't question anyone else in that line, did you?" "No, sir," Deborah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Naomi shifted uncomfortably in her seat, watching the scene unfold. Part of her felt vindicated seeing Deborah squirm under her father's scrutiny, but another part of her felt uneasy. She didn't want to ruin anyone's life, even if they had wronged her. "I should fire you on the spot," Malcolm said, his tone cold. "But I'm not interested in ruining your career. I'm interested in making sure this doesn't happen again, to anyone." Deborah looked up, her eyes wide with relief and confusion. "Thank you, sir. I promise it won't happen again." Malcolm leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "It won't, because you're going to spend the next 3 months in mandatory bias training, and after that you'll personally lead a workshop for your colleagues about the importance of treating every passenger with respect, no matter how they look. Do you understand me?" Deborah nodded quickly, her face a mixture of gratitude and humiliation. "Yes, sir, I understand." "Good," Malcolm said, standing up. He glanced at the director. "Make sure this happens, and let's not have a repeat of this incident, or next time there won't be second chances." The director nodded fervently. "Of course, Mr. Carter. We'll ensure it's handled appropriately." As Malcolm turned to leave, Naomi followed him out of the room, her mind spinning. When they were back in the terminal, she finally broke the silence. "Dad, why didn't you fire her?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Malcolm stopped and looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Because, Princess, firing her might have made me feel better. But it wouldn't fix the real problem. People like her don't need punishment. They need education. If she learns from this, maybe she'll think twice next time. Maybe she'll treat the next passenger with dignity. That's how we change things." Naomi nodded slowly, her father's words settling in her mind. For the first time, she understood why he carried himself with such quiet strength. It wasn't just about power or wealth. It was about using both to make a difference. As they walked toward the baggage claim, Naomi slipped her hand into her father's, her earlier hurt replaced with a newfound sense of pride. As they made their way toward the baggage claim, Naomi felt a mix of relief and lingering unease. She admired how her father had handled the situation with poise and power, but the memory of Deborah's dismissive tone still stung. Naomi had always been aware of the whispers of prejudice around her, but this was the first time it had been so blatant, so personal. "Do things like that happen a lot, Dad?" she asked hesitantly, breaking the silence. Malcolm glanced at her, his expression softening. "More than they should," he admitted. "I've dealt with it my whole life, Princess. People looking at me and deciding I didn't belong before I even opened my mouth." "But you're you," Naomi said, her voice rising with frustration. "You're successful. You're respected. How could anyone not see that?" Malcolm chuckled lightly, though there was no humor in his tone. "Respect doesn't come with a guarantee, Naomi. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much you achieve. Some people will only see what they want to see." Naomi frowned, her thoughts swirling. "But you don't let it bother you?" "Oh, it bothers me," Malcolm said, his voice deepening. "But I don't let it stop me. That's the difference. If I let every slight and every assumption hold me back, I wouldn't be where I am today." Before Naomi could respond, her father's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen, his expression darkening for a split second before he quickly put the phone away. "Is it work?" Naomi asked, her voice tinged with worry. Malcolm hesitated. "Something like that. Let's just focus on getting our bags and heading to the hotel." Naomi nodded, but a sense of unease crept into her chest. Her father wasn't telling her everything. She could feel it. When they reached the baggage claim, Malcolm excused himself for a moment to take a call. Naomi stayed behind, watching the conveyor belt as luggage slowly emerged. But her focus wavered when she noticed a man standing a few feet away. He was tall, dressed in a rumpled suit, and his eyes kept darting toward her. At first, Naomi thought it was just her imagination, but when their eyes met, the man quickly looked away. Something about him felt off. Naomi's heart began to race. She tried to convince herself she was being paranoid, but the man's movements were deliberate. He wasn't waiting for luggage. He was watching her. When Malcolm returned a moment later, Naomi grabbed his arm. "Dad," she whispered urgently, "that man over there? I think he's following us." Malcolm's gaze snapped to the man, his expression instantly shifting to one of quiet alertness. He placed a protective hand on Naomi's shoulder and led her to a quieter corner of the baggage area. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low but firm. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding. She clung to her father's side as the man continued to linger near the carousel, pretending to look at his phone, but glancing at them every few seconds. "Do you know him?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Malcolm said, his jaw tightening, "but I'm about to find out." Before Naomi could protest, Malcolm stepped forward, his commanding presence drawing the man's attention immediately. "Can I help you with something?" Malcolm asked, his tone polite, but laced with unmistakable authority. The man froze, clearly caught off guard. No," he stammered, taking a step back. "I was just waiting for my bag." Malcolm's sharp eyes scanned the man's face, his expression unyielding. "Your bag, huh? Funny, because you haven't looked at the carousel once?" The man's face reddened, and he began to back away. "I don't want any trouble," he muttered, before turning and hurrying toward the exit. Malcolm watched him go, his stance still tense. Only when the man disappeared through the sliding doors did he turn back to Naomi. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder. Naomi nodded, though her heart was still racing. Who was that? I don't know, Malcolm admitted, his brows furrowed in thought, but I don't like it. They collected their luggage quickly and left the airport in silence, Malcolm's watchful eyes scanning their surroundings the entire time. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening, something her father hadn't told her. As they climbed into the back of a sleek black car waiting outside, Naomi turned to him. "Dad, is this about the airline?" Malcolm hesitated, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. For the first time that day, he looked genuinely unsettled. "It might be," he said finally. "But whatever it is, I'll make sure you're safe. That's all that matters." Naomi nodded, but the knot in her stomach only tightened. She could see the tension in her father's jaw, the way his hand gripped the armrest. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. The drive to the hotel was quiet, but not the kind of peaceful silence Naomi had hoped for. Instead, it felt heavy, laden with questions neither she nor her father were ready to ask. She stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, her mind replaying the encounter with the man at the airport. She couldn't shake the look in his eyes, furtive, calculating, and somehow familiar, though she couldn't place why. Malcolm, meanwhile, sat stiffly beside her, his phone in hand. His fingers hovered over the screen, but he didn't type or call anyone. Naomi could tell he was deep in thought, his mind churning with possibilities. When they arrived at the hotel, a towering 5-star building with glistening windows and marble floors, Malcolm stepped out first, scanning the area as though expecting trouble. Naomi followed, gripping her small carry-on tightly. Inside the lobby, the concierge greeted them with a warm smile, but Malcolm's focus never wavered. He led Naomi to the elevator, his eyes darting to every shadow, every unfamiliar face. As soon as they entered their suite, Malcolm locked the door behind them and flipped the security latch. Naomi set her bag down and turned to him, unable to hold back any longer. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Malcolm sighed, running a hand over his face. "I didn't want to worry you, Princess, but I think it's time we had a talk." Naomi sat down on the edge of the couch, her heart pounding. "A talk about what? That man? The airline?" "Both," Malcolm admitted. He pulled a chair across from her and sat down, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "I've made a lot of decisions in my life, some good, some bad, and in the process I've made a few enemies, people who don't like seeing someone like me succeed." Naomi frowned. "You mean because you're black?" "Partly," Malcolm said, his voice tightening. "But it's not just that. When you own something as big as an airline, you're bound to step on a few toes. People don't like competition, especially when they think you don't deserve to be in their space. That man at the airport, he might be one of those people." Naomi's eyes widened. "So? You think he was following us?" "I don't think," Malcolm said grimly. "I know." Before Naomi could respond, Malcolm's phone buzzed loudly on the coffee table. He grabbed it immediately, his expression hardening as he read the caller ID. Without a word, he stood and stepped into the adjoining room, closing the door behind him. Naomi sat frozen, her mind racing. She felt a strange mix of fear and anger. Who was this man? What did he want? And why was her father so calm about all of this? Unable to sit still, she stood and began pacing the room. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "People who don't like seeing someone like me succeed." The idea made her stomach churn. It wasn't fair. Her father had worked hard for everything they had, and yet people still wanted to tear him down. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound, a faint knock at the door. Naomi froze, her eyes darting to the entryway. "Dad!" she called out, but there was no response. The knock came again, louder this time. Naomi's heart began to race. She approached the door slowly, her fingers trembling, as she peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. Then she heard it, a soft scrape, like someone fiddling with the lock. "Dad!" she yelled, backing away from the door. Malcolm burst out of the adjoining room, his phone still in hand. "What is it?" "The door," Naomi stammered, pointing. "Someone's trying to get in." Malcolm's face darkened. He motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door. The scraping sound had stopped, but he didn't take any chances. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice firm. There was no response. Malcolm glanced through the peephole, his body tense. After a moment, he opened the door cautiously, revealing the empty hallway beyond. He stepped out, looking both ways. But the corridor was deserted. "Stay here," he told Naomi before stepping into the hall. Naomi watched anxiously as her father disappeared around the corner. A minute passed, then two, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, Malcolm returned, his expression grim. "Whoever it was, they're gone now. But I don't like this." "What do we do?" Naomi asked, her voice shaky. Malcolm grabbed his phone and made a call. "It's Carter," he said tersely. "I need security on our floor immediately, and I want footage from the hallway cameras pulled now." He hung up and turned to Naomi, his jaw set. "We're going to get to the bottom of this, but for now, I need you to stay alert, okay? Don't answer the door unless I'm with you. Don't trust anyone." Naomi nodded, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father like this, so serious, so protective. As they waited for security to arrive, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whoever that man was, he wasn't done with them. And now, more than ever, she wanted to know why. The knock on the door moments later made Naomi flinch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Malcolm placed a calming hand on her shoulder, then approached the door with the same controlled demeanor he'd carried all day. This time, though, he didn't need to ask who it was. Through the peephole, he spotted two burly men in black suits with security badges pinned to their lapels. Malcolm unlocked the door and nodded at the men as they entered. Both were no-nonsense types, their movements precise and professional. "Mr. Carter," the taller of the two began, his voice low but firm, "we've secured the floor and pulled the hallway footage, just as you requested. The feed confirms there was a man lingering near your door about 5 minutes ago." "Did you get a clear look at his face?" Malcolm asked, his tone sharp. "Yes, sir," the man replied. "We're running the image through our database now. He doesn't appear to be a guest, and there's no record of him passing through the front desk." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "So, he slipped past security." The shorter man stepped forward. "It's possible he had help from someone on the inside. We're investigating that angle as well." Naomi stood near the couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Why would someone do this? Why follow us?" The taller guard glanced at Malcolm, clearly uncertain about whether to answer. Malcolm waved a hand. "It's fine. Tell her what you know." The guard hesitated before speaking. "We can't confirm anything yet, miss, but given Mr. Carter's position, it's not unusual for people to try to intimidate or harass him. Corporate rivals, disgruntled employees, even extremists. It could be anything." "Extremists?" Naomi repeated, her voice rising. Malcolm placed a hand on her shoulder again. "It's just a possibility," he said calmly. "We don't know for sure." The guards exchanged a glance. "There's one more thing," the shorter one said, hesitating. "We found this." He handed Malcolm a folded piece of paper retrieved from his pocket. It was creased and slightly smudged, but the message scrawled across it in bold black ink was impossible to miss. "You don't belong here." Naomi's blood ran cold as she stared at the words. What does that mean?" "It's a threat," Malcolm said grimly, "and it's not subtle." The guards stood silently, awaiting instructions. Malcolm turned to them, his expression unreadable. "I want a full report on that man within the hour. If he's still in this building, I want him found. And double-check the staff. Someone let him through." "Yes, sir," the taller guard said with a curt nod. The two men left the suite, leaving Naomi and Malcolm alone once more. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was suffocating. "Dad," Naomi said finally, her voice trembling, "this is serious, isn't it?" Malcolm knelt in front of her, his face softening as he placed his hands on her shoulders. "It is, Princess. But I promise you I won't let anything happen to you. Do you understand me?" Naomi nodded, though fear still clung to her like a shadow. Malcolm stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtains aside to look out at the city below. The faint glow of the skyline seemed to mock the turmoil in their suite. His mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why now? And was it really about the airline, or was it something deeper? The sound of Malcolm's phone buzzing again broke the silence. He answered quickly, his tone clipped. "Carter." Naomi watched as his face darkened, his free hand clenching into a fist. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice dropping. The answer on the other end of the line made his expression even grimmer. "Keep digging," he said before hanging up. "What was that?" Naomi asked, her nerves fraying at the edges. Malcolm turned to her, his face a mask of control. "That man at the airport, he's connected to someone I dealt with years ago, someone who wasn't happy with the way things ended." Naomi swallowed hard. What happened? Malcolm hesitated, clearly debating how much to tell her. Finally he sighed. "Back when I was building the airline, I had to make some tough decisions. I had a partner, James Tully. We started the company together, but his vision didn't align with mine. He wanted shortcuts, dirty deals. I refused." "And?" Naomi prompted, leaning forward. "And I bought him out," Malcolm continued. "Legally, fairly, but he didn't see it that way. He felt betrayed, like I had stolen the company from him. He swore he'd make me pay for it one day. I haven't heard from him in years, until now." "You think he sent that man?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm nodded slowly. "It's possible. Tully always preferred sending other people to do his dirty work." Naomi's stomach churned. What if he's still after us? What if he doesn't stop? Malcolm's gaze hardened, the fire in his eyes unmistakable. "Then I'll stop him first." Naomi looked at her father, seeing not just the man who had protected her all her life, but a fighter, a man who had faced prejudice, betrayal, and now threats against his family and refused to back down. As the weight of the situation settled over them, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. This time, the message on the screen made his jaw tighten. "This isn't over." Malcolm turned to Naomi, his voice steady but resolute. "Stay close to me, Princess. Things are about to get complicated." As the clock ticked, Malcolm's phone buzzed once again. This time, it was the head of security. "Sir, we've confirmed the identity of the man near your door. His name is Evan Landry, a known associate of James Tully. He checked into a nearby hotel yesterday under an alias. We've sent the details to your email." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "And the note? Any prints?" "None, sir. The paper was wiped clean." "Of course it was," Malcolm muttered. "Keep a close eye on Landry. If he moves, I want to know about it immediately." "Yes, sir." As the call ended, Malcolm turned to Naomi. "We're not taking any chances. Pack a bag. We're moving to a secure location tonight." Naomi's eyes widened. "Tonight? But where will we go?" "To one of my properties," Malcolm replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Somewhere they can't reach us." Within an hour, they were in another sleek black car, escorted by 2 additional security vehicles. Naomi watched the city fade into the background as they drove toward an isolated estate on the outskirts of town. The sprawling property was surrounded by high fences and guarded gates, the epitome of security and luxury. As they entered the grand house, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video call. The caller ID read James Tully. Malcolm's expression turned cold. "Naomi, go to your room. Now." "But, Dad—" "Now," he repeated, his voice firm. Naomi hesitated but obeyed, retreating to one of the guest rooms upstairs. She left the door ajar, her heart pounding as she strained to hear her father's voice. "James," Malcolm said, his tone icy, "I wondered how long it would take for you to show your face." "Hello, Malcolm," a gravelly voice replied, filled with mock friendliness. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" "Not long enough," Malcolm retorted. "What do you want?" "Come now, Malcolm," Tully said with a dark chuckle. "Isn't it obvious? I want what you took from me." "I took nothing from you," Malcolm said firmly. "I gave you a fair deal, and you walked away with more money than you deserved." Tully's laughter turned bitter. "And yet, here you are, sitting on an empire, while I'm scraping by. It's not fair, Malcolm. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," Malcolm snapped. "If you think sending your lackeys after me and my daughter will scare me, you're sorely mistaken." "Ah, your daughter," Tully said, his tone turning sinister. "She's a lovely girl. It'd be a shame if something happened to her." Malcolm's hand tightened around his phone. "If you so much as look in her direction again, I will bury you, James." "Big words," Tully said mockingly. "But you can't watch her all the time. I'll be seeing you, Malcolm, sooner than you think." The call ended abruptly, leaving Malcolm seething. Upstairs, Naomi sat frozen, her heart racing. She had heard every word, and the threat against her was clear as day. That night, sleep eluded them both. Malcolm stayed awake, pacing the house as he strategized his next move. Naomi, unable to shake the fear that gripped her, clutched her pillow tightly, wishing for the safety and simplicity of a normal life. But deep down, she knew that nothing would ever be normal again. The morning dawned cold and tense, but Malcolm was already up before the sun, phone pressed to his ear. His voice carried an edge of authority as he gave precise instructions to his team. Naomi watched him from the staircase, her father's normally composed demeanor replaced with an almost chilling focus. "Track every account, every asset Tully has left," Malcolm said sharply. "I don't care if it's offshore or buried under his mattress. Find it, and dig into Landry's movements. I want to know who else is involved." Naomi descended the stairs slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Dad, what are you going to do?" Malcolm turned to her, softening just slightly. "What I should have done years ago, and this. Tully's mistake was thinking he could threaten you and walk away untouched." Naomi hesitated, her stomach churning. "But if you push back, won't it just make things worse?" "No," Malcolm said firmly. "Men like Tully only understand strength. He crossed a line, and now he'll learn there are consequences." By midday, Malcolm's team had delivered everything he needed. Tully's remaining assets were a fraction of what he once controlled, and his associates were little more than hired thugs. Still, Tully's ego remained intact, and his obsession with revenge had made him reckless. Malcolm called a meeting in the estate's secure conference room, flanked by his head of security and his personal attorney. Naomi sat quietly at the back, listening as her father outlined his plan. "Freeze his accounts," Malcolm instructed the attorney. "Every penny he's using to fund this nonsense needs to disappear. I also want liens filed against his properties. He owes me for damages and defamation." The attorney nodded. "I'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the day." Malcolm turned to the head of security. "And Landry?" "We've located him, sir," the man replied. "He's still at the hotel. Do you want him brought in?" Malcolm nodded. "Yes, but no rough stuff. I want him to walk into that meeting room knowing exactly how badly he's miscalculated." Naomi's eyes widened. "Meeting room? You're bringing him here?" Malcolm glanced at her, his expression steady. "Yes, it's time we made it clear that this game is over." That evening, Landry was escorted into the estate, flanked by 2 burly guards. His swagger from the airport was gone, replaced with a nervous energy as he glanced around the luxurious surroundings. When he was led into the conference room, Malcolm was already seated at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, but his eyes cold. "Mr. Landry," Malcolm said smoothly, gesturing to the chair opposite him, "please, have a seat." Landry hesitated, then sat down stiffly, his hands clasped in front of him. "Look, Mr. Carter, I don't know what you think—" Malcolm held up a hand, silencing him. "You've already made one mistake by working with Tully. Don't make another by lying to me." Landry swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling. "It was just a job," he stammered. "Tully paid me to keep an eye on you, that's all." "And the note?" Malcolm asked, his tone icy. "Was that just a job, too?" Landry looked away, his guilt written all over his face. "I didn't mean anything by it. I swear." Malcolm leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You didn't mean anything by threatening my daughter?" Landry opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Malcolm's gaze bore into him, unrelenting. "You've made your choices, Mr. Landry," Malcolm continued. "Now you'll deal with the consequences. Your employer has no money, no allies, and no future. And as for you—" He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You'll never work in this business again. Every company you approach will know exactly who you are and what you've done." Landry's eyes widened in panic. "Wait, please! I'll tell you everything. I'll testify against Tully. Just don't ruin me." Malcolm studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "If you're willing to cooperate, we'll consider leniency, but understand this. If I ever see you near my family again, there won't be another conversation. Do you understand?" Landry nodded furiously. "Yes, sir, I swear I'll stay away." Malcolm gestured to the guards. "Escort him out, and make sure he keeps his word." The next day, Malcolm received word that Tully had been served with the lawsuits and asset freezes. The man's defiant exterior crumbled quickly when faced with the reality of losing everything. Within hours, Tully himself called Malcolm, his voice desperate. "Malcolm, listen, we can work this out." Malcolm cut him off. "The time for negotiations is over, James. You crossed the line when you threatened my daughter. You're done." "Please," Tully begged. "I'll leave you alone. I'll disappear." "You already should have," Malcolm replied coldly. "Goodbye, James." He hung up, his final act of cutting Tully out of their lives for good. That evening, Malcolm and Naomi sat on the back patio of the estate, watching the sun set over the horizon. For the first time in days, the tension between them had eased. "Is it really over?" Naomi asked softly. Malcolm nodded. "It is. Tully won't bother us again." Naomi leaned against him, feeling the steady strength in his presence. "I'm proud of you, Dad." Malcolm smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "And I'm proud of you, Princess. You handled all of this with more courage than most adults would." As the sky turned to shades of orange and pink, Naomi felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with her father by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they were unshakable. Did you enjoy this gripping tale of justice, family, and resilience? Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment about your favorite moment, and hit subscribe to join us for more powerful stories like this. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.